Peru, a country shrouded in mystery. Located along Peru's southern coast lies the Nazca Desert, a dry plateau or pampa that stretches for 37 miles along the Pacific coast. It's one of the driest, most scarcely populated places on Earth, and home to one of the most spectacular signs on the planet, the Nazca Lines. Just over 80 years ago, locals and visitors alike had no idea these lines even existed, though scholars date the lines and figures back to the days before Christ. But how could thousands of perfectly designed lines, shapes, and intricately drawn animal and plant figures, some over 9 miles long, go unnoticed? Take a plane ride over the Nazca Valley, and one of the world's greatest mysteries unfolds.
Okay, prepare your cameras, please. We see the astronaut for the site over the hillside.
The Nazca Lines were only first discovered in the 1920s, when commercial flights began flying over southern Peru, and pilots began reporting strange sights on the desert below. And since then, the mystery of the lines has captured the minds of the world. But who drew these cryptic images visible only from the sky? And more importantly, what were they trying to say?
The gigantic forms were clearly meant for communicating with the gods. For that reason, the figures are so huge.
For the ancient Peruvians, people didn't die. They simply stopped living in this world in order to go onto the next world of their ancestors.
Find here many people that they are sure have seen many UFOs around this area.
Travelers flock to this mysterious region of Peru to see if they can make a cosmic connection, not only in the sky, but also on the ground. Ancient Nazca pottery bears an uncanny resemblance to the modern-day eyewitness accounts of UFOs hovering overhead. We'll scour the desert and the sky to find the missing pieces to this ancient puzzle. Eduardo Haran is a commercial pilot who has been flying visitors over the lines for decades.
Okay, friends, in 1 more minute, we recognize the astronaut, 32 meters longer and correspond to Paracas culture, 800 years before Christ.
Eduardo actually discovered and named the astronaut figure in the 1980s. For Eduardo, the Nazca Lines are much more than a popular attraction.
And all around the world exists only one Nazca Lines. Now it's a unique monument around the world.
Flying over the Nazca Lines is the best way to appreciate their sheer size. But back on solid ground, we're able to look closer at the clues.
From this tower, it's possible to see 2 drawings very clear. On the left side, we see that you would call the hands of frog. And here on the right, you see that you would call the tree. It's all coming here is the branches, that's called Warango tree.
The exact number of lines and figures is unknown. Some say there are thousands of images covering over 400 square miles in the Nazca and Palpa regions.
In general, we count complex of figures. In this case, for example, here we have only one complex, but it's composed by at least 12 individual geoglyphs. But in general, we are speaking for Nazca and Palpa area at least for 3,000 or 4,000 complex.
Archaeologists believe the drawings were made starting in 200 BC, long before the Incas and long before visitors began to flock to this mysterious region.
Word of the geoglyphs was already circulating in the time of the Incas and were considered drawings made by previous generations. The first person to discover the lines in the 1920s was Paul Cossack.
Paul Cossack was an archaeologist who believed that the lines were somehow related to the stars. Cossack and German mathematician Maria Ricci both dedicated their lives to understanding the Nazca Lines. They both died before they found the answers, but their research reveals startling results. And after 50 years of research, Ricci believed the lines and figures comprised a vast astronomical calendar.
Definitely, some of the hieroglyphics do have an astronomical relationship, in particular the solstice and the equinox, and also the measurement of time and the seasons.
But the quest for answers soon turned away from the sky, and researchers began digging for secrets flowing beneath the earth. Perhaps learning more about how the Nazca lived would give researchers insight on what they were trying to say.
We know that the water is one of the elements related to the hieroglyphics, like the worship of water and fertility. The water for the Nazca was extremely important, since living in the desert, water signified life.
The Nazca were able to irrigate the desert for farming. But in a land that receives an average of 20 minutes of light rain per year, how did they do it? One theory proposed that the Nazca lines were related to a system of underground rivers linked to a giant underground aquifer. Could the Nazca lines serve as a clandestine map of secret water sources?
We have enough evidence in the platforms that they built close to the geoglyphs. They make different ceremonies, especially offerings, which are clearly related to ask water to the gods.
That the geoglyphs represent water flows sounds great, but there is no solid proof to date. Also, we could say that the Nazca had the ability to tap into subterranean waters, but again, to this date, we have no proof.
But by digging up the past, archaeologists found a darker side to the Nazca culture. The discoveries of several necropolises, or cities of the dead, revealed the sacred but gruesome rituals of death. Perhaps it will also reveal the hidden meaning behind the Nazca lines.
The cult of the dead is a very special practice that was observed in ancient times.
In the 1920s, when airplanes first began to fly over the mystical desert landscape of southern Peru, pilots began reporting mysterious and spectacular signs etched in the desert floor. After several decades of dead-end theories and talk of UFOs, the Nazca lines remained an enigma. Why did the Nazca people etch these enormous figures, lines, and shapes in the middle of the desert at a time when no one could fly? To find out, we'll take a closer look at the landscape of the Nazca Pampa. The entire desert is covered by a layer of ferrous oxide rock that was dispersed from a massive volcanic eruption millions of years ago. But how did they design these complex patterns over such great distances? We've tracked down the two men who may hold the clues. Josue Lancho, a professor of history and archaeology, and Jorge Garcia, who worked with the legendary German mathematician Maria Ricci for 30 years. Jorge was present during the discovery of several sites and has a particular artifact that could prove to be a critical piece of the puzzle.
These are the famous tupus. We found these tupus in the field somewhere. Maria Ricci and I tried to see how we could make the lines more straight with a viewing device or something like that.
Tupus are rudimentary surveying tools and were apparently found at the site of several Nazca lines. According to Jorge, by allowing light to pass through two of the tupus, one could make a perfectly straight line over a great distance. Jorge believes that the Nazca people created these amazing geoglyphs spanning thousands of years by using simple instruments and basic geometry. Jorge also found several bits of ceramics which could reveal what the lines were used for.
This type of ceramic shows how they conducted the ceremonies in these lines, in the Pampas.
According to Jorge Garcia, the Nazca believed they were born in distant constellations, and the geoglyphs were signs meant for their ancestors millions of miles away.
The Nazca had a fantastic criteria of what is cosmic vision. The cosmic vision, they took it as if they had been born from each constellation.
But as an archaeologist, Josue Lancho disagrees with his friend and believes the Nazca lines have a far more earthly significance. Located less than a mile from the nearest Nazca line is the necropolis of Chalchilla.
We're here in grave number 1, and there we see a mummy wearing a red tunic. For these people, death didn't exist. It was a journey to the world of their ancestors. In this case, this man was an ordinary man. He's prepared with his fields for his chicha, his corn, his beans, so that he can go to and return from the land of his ancestors.
Archaeologists began finding many of the same ceremonial artifacts and ceramics in these graves as were found at the site of the Nazca lines. Were the lines somehow connected to these elaborate rituals of death?
The cult of the dead is a very special practice that was observed in ancient times, but also in culture throughout the world. In respect to the Nazca culture, they've channeled this practice through their iconography on their textiles and ceramics.
The ceremonial ceramics found at both Chauchilla and in the Pampas prove that the Nazca lines were somehow used in ancient rituals, but the connection still wasn't clear. The biggest breakthrough came with the discovery of another ancient site, the lost city of Cahuachi. First thought to be a large urban center, Cahuachi was actually an entire city dedicated solely to religious ceremonies.
Cahuachi is considered the largest ceremonial center in the world, or you can say the biggest city in the world.
The ancient ceramics found at Cahuachi, like the ones found at Chauchilla, were important clues to the mystery.
La cercanía de Cahuachi a las líneas de Nazca prácticamente están separadas.
Cahuachi and the Nazca lines are only separated by 1 or 2 kilometers.
Centro ceremonial, donde era habitado.
This was a center dedicated to ceremonial rites.
Ceremoniales. Y las pampas de
The
Nazca,
people of Cahuachi could use the Nazca lines and figures as a location to carry out their ceremonies to the gods.
El lagarto, otra familia con el colibrí, otra familia con la ballena.
Cahuachi was the religious center of the Nazca world, and Jorge believes the long web of lines found in the desert were interconnecting pathways leading from Cahuachi out to the elaborate figures.
Panteísta y animista.
Each familiar group were composed of segments of about 100 or 200 people per group, and each group worshipped its own minor god. For example, you could identify one family with a spider, another family with a lizard, another with a hummingbird. They needed a great big temple without walls, a great religious stage.
Por lo tanto, necesitaban
What better platform than the Pampas, where the desert artists drew grandiose figures meant for the gods in the high heavens above.
We may never know for sure what the Nazca lines were meant to say, but their magic lies in their obscurity. The Nazca people left great images in the desert, not for themselves, but for others, for gods, for the cosmos, or maybe for us.
And I remember in Mexico, the young lady said me, Eduardo, and it's possible the Nazca people die and the spirit is up on the sky and see the lines. And for me, it's wow, why not, you know? And maybe it's a mystery, and in the future it's maybe opening, we don't know.
The Nazca lines show signs of an advanced civilization, but not far from the lines in Peru, drawings etched into rocks hidden in a cave threaten to rewrite history. The ancient people of Peru created a culture as mysterious as the land itself. The Nazca left behind cryptic signs that modern man has been trying to understand for centuries. The Inca culture left behind the ancient temple of Sacsayhuaman in Cusco and the stunning ruins of Machu Picchu. And in the small, bustling city of Ica, messages from an unknown civilization carved in stone could rewrite history.
Each stone engraving is like a page from a book with distinct subjects, where we can find aspects from astronomy, medicine, and biology. In truth, the stone engravings are a testimony to the humanity that existed before our own. In this stone, we can see the chapter that we call Man's Coexistence with the Dinosaur. Here we have a stone that is inside what we call the medical chapter. It depicts an operation of the cerebral hemispheres.
Known today as the Ica stones, this collection of detailed carvings shows signs of a highly advanced society. On the stones are elaborate scenes depicting highly complex medical procedures, the use of telescopes, and even vessels for flight. What ancient civilization could have carved these stones, and exactly how long ago did they exist? The answers may be found at the Ica Stones Museum in Ica, Peru, where Ricardo Hochamuit and Jenny Caprera solemnly guard these groundbreaking relics. Jenny's father, Dr. Javier Cabrera, began collecting the stones in the 1960s after heavy rains and floods exposed a cave with thousands of unusual stones buried inside.
My father received a gift of a rock to use as a paperweight in his office from one of his patients who was also his friend. He was amazed by the drawings on the rock. Little by little, he went on collecting.
And when Dr. Cabrera began to expand his collection, one stone in particular caught his attention.
Here is a pregnant woman whose blood is being extracted for the heart transplant of another patient. This led him to research the meaning behind this engraving. His findings determined that a pregnant woman's blood goes through changes in which a hormone is produced. It seems that the hormone is produced so that the woman would not naturally abort the little creature growing inside herself.
Besides medical and technological advancements, the stones also revealed the secrets behind a long-lost continent.
Here we can appreciate the other part of the Earth's hemisphere. Here's North America, South America, where later they would join together, and even later, the cataclysm. And this is very important because we have here what we can call the Atlantis continent, which Plato wrote about, the lost continent of the world.
Could the Ica stones be proof of the great cataclysm that extinguished the dinosaurs and rearranged the continents? Or even provide a map that leads us to the lost civilization of Atlantis?
In the Ica stone engravings, we can appreciate that Atlantis is very close to what is present-day Europe. It could actually be part of Europe.
The other startling revelation the stones convey is the age of the civilization that carved them, a timeline of humanity that would shatter our perception of the universe.
This is one of the most controversial stone engravings because present-day paleontology does not acknowledge that man and the dinosaur lived in the same era. The dinosaur disappeared about 65 to 70 million years ago, and the oldest man, as far as we know, dates back to only 20,000 years ago.
There are those who reject the authenticity of the entire collection of Ica stones, but Jenny Cabrera and Ricardo Hochamowit say they can prove they're real.
There was a study being done at the University of Madrid in which two people came and with permission excavated many of the stones. They took them to analyze in the laboratory and discovered that one of them was over 99,000 years old.